among many other charges, in this horrific case. I have been personally involved and briefed on all aspects of the charging and the bail request on these two cases. ADA's and victim services staff have been in direct communication with the families impacted by these terrible acts of violence. And I can tell you that, you know, one of the families, which is local, and that is the family of the 2-year-old, have been visited by this office. We are doing something this holiday season which we refer to as Hope for the Holidays. Essentially what that means is direct in-person communication with family members about who have lost a loved one or have suffered a terrible loss of some sort. We have already engaged in that with reference to this case, and I can tell you that our excellent victim services crew have been in contact with families in both of these cases. You might ask why that's important. This is an office that is committed to doing better, to making sure victims and their families hear from us before information is announced through the media. We are very familiar with what families go through, especially now. Anyway, let's talk first about the case involving the Uber. Just imagine for a minute, you or someone you care about is traveling in an Uber on their way to something important, business, personal, family, whatever it may be, thinking about whatever's going on the rest of the day, expecting a long future, minding your own business, breaking no laws, taking care of people, and then suddenly the vehicle you're in is struck, demolished, destroyed by someone who is trying to run away from a warrant that was being served due to something else that the driver should not have done. And driving at a high rate of speed, this person T-bones that vehicle, causing massive destruction, massive harm, and killing this passenger. The 63-year-old woman who was killed in this process is Angela Cooper. The driver was a gentleman named Stephen Thomas. That's S-T-E-V-E-N, Thomas. We want the families and surviving victim to know that our office is doing everything and will continue to do everything we can to get justice and to hold this defendant properly accountable for this terrible act. I can tell you that Angela Cooper, like pretty much almost every victim I've ever heard of, was a remarkable person who did a lot of homeless outreach on her own for no compensation at all, PICO employee, very involved in her church, took care of both parents when this was going on, and addressed medical needs in the family that were serious and also private, which is why I'm not going to give a lot of details on that, but she was always sacrificing for others. Case number 2. Victims 2. Her name is Kimani Bean. Last name is B-E-A-N. Excuse me. First name is Kimani, K-E-Y, apostrophe, M-O-N-N-I-E. Kimani, first name, Bean, last name. This is a brutal beating that, by all indications, caused the death of this child. The beating came from the mother's boyfriend, not the father, with whom we've been in contact, who cared deeply about this child, but the mother's boyfriend. It is really important that we protect vulnerable people. In this case, there's quite an age discrepancy between two, a girl of 2 and a woman of 63. But it is very important we protect all vulnerable people, regardless of age, regardless of gender. These women and girls deserve our protection and deserved all of our protection, and this is a tremendous loss to all of us. We should be outraged at what happened to this 2-year-old and what happened to Angela Cooper. At this time, I want to identify some of the good people here. We have ADA Bob Wainwright, who's the chief of the DAO's Homicide Non-Fatal Shooting Unit. He is here not only in his own right, but also standing in for Jeff Hajnowski, who's an assistant supervisor in the same unit and is currently unavailable and therefore could not be here today. But Bob is here both in his own right and to stand in for Mr. Hajnowski. We have with us ADA Ashley Tazlowski, who is a prosecutor in the DAO's Homicide Non-Fatal Shooting Unit, who is handling the case involving our 2-year-old. We have Mariel Dela Cruz, Director of DAO's Victim Services Unit, with us. Jethro Heiko, Assistant Director of Training, Compliance, and Administration at the DAO's Victim Services Unit. Tracy Washington, Assistant Director of Support Services, is here for the DAO's Victim Services Unit. We have Giriana Hernandez, Assistant Director of External Victim Services Partnerships from the DAO's Victim Services Unit. If you're wondering what that means, there are outside entities that are funded through the DA's office and work closely with us to protect victims and survivors throughout the city. And therefore, Giriana is connecting directly to those independent agencies that work closely with us in this matter. At this time, I'd like to take the opportunity to call up ADA Ashley Tazlowski to speak about the case involving our 2-year-old, to speak about the defendant whose name I've already mentioned to you, Sean Hernandez, also known as Rafi Gorham, but she also has details on a couple of other individuals. After she concludes, I will try to provide a little bit more information, possibly with the help of Bob Wainwright, in reference to the other case. It is my pleasure to call forward Ashley Tazlowski.
Good afternoon. A little over a week ago, on December 8th, officers responded to a location, 2149 South Beechwood here in Philadelphia. What they found was an unresponsive child, Kimani Bean, pictured here. Officers immediately noticed what I will classify as extensive bruising to her body. They immediately made those notifications. Initially, the Special Victims Unit was assigned. However, when it became clear that her death was likely the result, what we now know is the result of that physical beating and altercation that happened, last week the case was transferred over to the Homicide Unit. Ultimately, while we're still waiting a final medical examiner report from the medical examiner's office, what we do know is that this has now been ruled a homicide, that her manner of death was a homicide, and the cause of her death at this point is listed as it's classified as multiple injuries. Obviously, when we get the full medical examiner's report, we'll be able to explain further what happened to her. But at this point, what we know is that she was severely beaten and suffered severe and significant physical injuries all over her body, and that ultimately was the cause of her death. Initially, when this happened to her, there were 4 people in the house. All 4 of those individuals in the last 48 hours have been brought to the homicide unit. Ultimately, 3 of them have been charged. Initially, defendant Anthony Lowry, last name Lowrie, he was the first individual charged. A female by the name of Alicia, and that's with a Y, Allycia, last name McNeil, McNeil, was also charged. Those 2 were not charged at all with what happened to her, other than they were charged with initially giving a false report to police. When police arrived, all on body-worn camera, they were interviewed, these 2 people, and Mr. Lowry initially gave a fake name, which detectives and officers later confirmed to be false, and both he and Ms. McNeil gave versions of the story that proved to be inaccurate. So they were charged with obstruction of justice, Mr. Lowry false ID to law enforcement, and both of them unsworn falsifications for essentially giving a different version of events. And that's just the initial information that was given to police, meaning on body-worn cam, to the initial investigators involved. Once the homicide unit took over and went through all this, it became apparent that the stories that were given initially were completely fabricated. So they were charged with that. Charges have been approved for them. In terms of the murder and killing of Kimani, Rafi Gorham, aka Sean Hernandez, it'll be captioned in the court system as Sean Hernandez, was ultimately charged with murder. He's been charged with murder generally, endangering the welfare of a child, possession of an instrument of crime, and recklessly endangering another person. Obviously, this is still very much an active investigation, and will continue to be. So I'm not going to obviously go into too many details. However, as the DA said, this individual was the mother's boyfriend, and it is, by all accounts, the information that we have is that he was the one responsible for what happened to her. Obviously, we know this is a physical assault. We believe that it happened that day, but there's also indication that perhaps this was an ongoing situation that, unfortunately, this little girl had to endure. As the DA said, he's been arraigned. The preliminary hearing date is in January, but I do want to emphasize this is very much still an active investigation into anyone else who has information about what was going on with her, may have known what was going on with her, and so that's something that will continue to be investigated in the coming weeks.
Thank you, Ashley. Now I'm going to call forward Bob Wainwright for a narrow purpose, which is to read to you the list of charges that we will be bringing shortly in relation to the Uber case. They are not brought yet, as I said earlier, because you have a defendant currently in the hospital, and therefore arraignment will not occur until he is released. We expect that will be fairly soon. We're not looking at months or anything of that sort of hospitalization. I do want to make sure, though, that I really emphasize in the prior case, the case involving the 2-year-old, the defendant is not the father. The father was not present. He had nothing to do with this. The defendant is the mother's boyfriend. I don't want there to be any confusion about that. The father's been through enough. Okay. Mr. Wainwright, can you come forward to read these charges, and then I'll have a few more words to say on this case.
All right, so regarding the hit and run of the Uber, the defendant's, as the DA said, he hasn't been arraigned yet, and that's because although he turned himself in, I think he's on video, as I've been told by ADA Hochnowski, who was charging this case, and is up to speed on all of the facts of this case. The defendant turned himself in, was walked in, and then complained about something that caused him to go to the hospital. So he hasn't been arraigned yet, but the charges, one he is arraigned, are going to be for the decedent in this case, as the DA mentioned, Angela Cooper. That would be homicide by vehicle, flight to avoid apprehension, fleeing or eluding police, accidents involving death. While not properly licensed, he was not licensed at the time of this incident, resisting arrest, accidents involving damage to an attended vehicle, driving while his operation privilege is suspended or revoked, and other summary offenses involving reckless, careless driving and driving with a revoked license. And then regarding the surviving victim who was severely injured, Stephen Thompson, he's also charged with aggravated assault, the first degree, accidents involving death or personal injury, accidents involving death or personal injury while not properly licensed, and simple assault. So we expect the defendant to be arraigned as soon as he can be arraigned, and we, as the DA mentioned, he's also was fleeing in relation to an open warrant that he will have to account for as well, and so he will be held in on high bail, would be the expectation.
Thank you, Bob. Mr. Wainwright laid out a lot of what there is to say. Couple of, or what we should say at this time. A couple of clarifications so we are clear. There was a warrant was being served, and it was being served at the place of work of the defendant, who, by whatever means, figured this out and took off in his car. He was not being pursued by a police vehicle when he took off. The accident happened within a short distance from the parking lot. It was within 4 blocks. I can't tell you whether they're long or short blocks. I would say, in general, though, the distance of travel was relatively short. The accident itself was absolutely devastating, as I'm sure you've already figured out. But those are the basic facts of that particular case. And we intend to pursue these cases vigorously, justly, and appropriately. Obviously, they're extremely serious. At this time, we'd like to entertain questions and give some answers where we can. Channel 6 ABC, Chris Edmondson, do you have any questions?
So I had a question about another case regarding those teens that were arrested for carjacking and shooting at police. So I just wanted to know what charges they were.
I don't have the right person or all the information here right now, but if we can, I'd like to speak to you afterwards and see how we can get you that information later today.
Thank you.
All right. Do you have any other questions, sir?
No, that was
Okay. All right. Mr. Baskerville of Channel 10 NBC, how are you?
Good.
I'm fine.
I guess in terms of with Kimani, can you give us any details of like what happened inside the house? Or how did it come to this? Do you know any details of using the child with hands? Was there any other instrument, any other things used in this death?
We do know some details. If you'll just give me the courtesy of speaking to Ashley for a moment to figure out how much we should or should not reveal. We'll try to give you as much as we can.
So obviously, again, we don't have the full medical examiner's report yet. What I can say is, by all indications, she was being a 2-year-old, right? I mean, what could a 2-year-old do to possibly deserve this? The answer is nothing. And so by all accounts, she was being a 2-year-old. In terms of whether there was previous abuse, that's obviously something we are very actively investigating as we speak, in terms of who in that house or who was around her, how many times he was around her, whether there are other people that know. That is absolutely something we are investigating. In terms of her physical injuries, what I can say is she obviously had signs of a very serious beating. There's also indications that there perhaps were objects used. When we get the full medical examiner's report, we'll know kind of what impact all of these things had on her. We also have preliminary information that perhaps her airway was compromised, and perhaps she was suffocated in some way.
You were talking about police showing up.
Yes.
that day. Was it the folks inside that just got so scared that they called police, or how did police get alerted?
So obviously, police were called, and that's one of the things that ultimately went into charging the initial charges the way we did, because when police arrived, the initial indication was we didn't call police. But obviously someone did. I think it was a situation where a lot of people inside perhaps didn't initially want to say they knew what they knew, which resulted in us charging it this way. You know, what I can say is that ultimately those people did come to homicide, and I think the full story then did come out. But initially everyone in the home was very reluctant.
Is the woman that you charged, is that the mother?
It is not. The mother is, as I mentioned, 4 people were brought to homicide yesterday. Kimani's mom was one of them. She has been released at this point pending further investigation, but she is not the individual that has been charged at this time.
Was the mother there at the time of the beating?
Yes. Yes.
Not necessarily the same room.
Right. I mean, and at this point, she's been released, right? So, I mean, we know that she was there, and we know that from the police when she arrived. Or when they arrived, she was there, these other 2 people were there, and the defendant was there. So at this time, it's something we're still investigating of who knew what and where. Perhaps we don't know who was all in the room at the time, other than to be sure that this defendant was in the room at the time.
I have kids, when you say just being a kid and a 2-year-old, I get that. But can you explain maybe it's a little bit more what you mean by just being a 2-year-old? Just running around being rambunctious, just, you know, not listening to adults? Is there any insight in that you can give us what you mean by just being a 2-year-old?
Quite frankly, I don't think there's any explanation that I could give that would provide an explanation for why this happened. The information that we have is just these types of things were the form of discipline that was used by him in that household. And that unfortunately, we do believe that this isn't the first time that perhaps something like this happened to her, but obviously this is the time that went as far as it did.
And I'm sorry I'm asking so many questions.
That's okay.
G.A. Krasner, you're obviously getting emotional. It seems like you're breaking down. What is it about, obviously, both these cases, but more specifically about when you look at Kimani's photo over there, what is it that comes at you when you look at the photo?
I mean, what doesn't? I say that respectfully, but what doesn't? It's heartbreaking. You don't have to be a parent. I am, but you don't have to be that. What doesn't tug at you? That's the best I can say. Anything else, sir?
Yeah, just my last question.
Yep.
Obviously, you know, we are also a Telemundo, so if they're about this case, you can just say in Spanish.
In Spanish, sure. Estamos aquí para anunciar cargos y un arresto en contra un novio de la mamá de una niña de 2 años, esta niña aquí. El novio la mató. Tenía 2 años. Es horrible y por eso tenemos cargos bien serios, incluyendo todas las formas de homicidio, y intentamos proseguir el caso de una moda fuerte y de una moda justa. All right, thank you, sir. Channel 29 Fox, Brian Zilai. Did I pronounce that right?
Almost.
What?
Zilai.
Zilai, okay. All right, very good. Brian Zilai.
Good, sir.
You're good? All right. KYW, is it Matt Coughlin? Coughlin. Yes, sir.
Regarding Mr. Cheney, did he have contact with the sheriff before being fled?
I do not know the answer to that question. I know this. I know that they were present. I know that at the time he made his escape, all of them or some of them had gotten out of their vehicle and were in the parking area of this workplace. At least that is my understanding. But that is the information I have right now. And that probably also explains why their vehicle was not pursuing him those few blocks before the accident. They had actually parked and emerged from their vehicle to carry out their duties when he made his escape through that parking lot.
Can you elaborate on the nature of the warrant?
I must admit that the person in charge of this case, with whom I spoke at length last night, is unavailable now. He has all that information. I don't. I am aware. I have heard two slightly different things about the nature of the warrant. One of them having to do with post-conviction supervision. One of them that it was a domestic event. It was a little unclear. We can find that out for you, and my apologies that I can't tell you off the top of my head. I know that if Jeff Hushnowski were here, he would know. Let me just see if Mr. Wainwright is aware. Well, let me do this. Let me see if by the time we conclude this press conference, we can get an answer for you so that I can complete the answer to that question. Is there anything else you need, sir?
Yeah, just one other question on that case. You mentioned Ms. Cooper taking care of her two parents, is that what you said?
Yes.
And any other family in the area?
There is other family in the area.
I have that answer.
You do have the answer? Okay. There is other family in the area, that's correct, and we may have the answer you were seeking.
Yes, he was on.
Do you want to come up there? Sure.
To answer your question, so the defendant was on probation at the time for a domestic violence strangulation case. And he had open warrants for that domestic violence case. And so there are detainers that would be holding him in addition to the bail that's going to be set on this case.
All right, thank you, sir. Let's see, Philadelphia Inquirer, Jillian Kramer. Hi. Nice to meet you. Sure.
The first, just for accuracy and verification, the home where she was found, was that her home, her mother's home, or was that the defendant's home?
Let me get you an answer. Ashley, did you hear that?
I did. Yeah, it's where she was staying with the mother and the boyfriend. Yeah.
Stay here.
You all had indicated that there may have been a history of abuse. It's my understanding that Kimani has siblings, and that maybe at one or multiple times, DCFS was called to either that home or to address concerns with her siblings. Do you have any information about past reports?
So I don't have specific information regarding past reports, but again, that is absolutely something that we too are investigating, because we do have information that perhaps is the case. What I can say in terms of, our perspective when it comes to these injuries, something that we will be waiting on is the medical examiners will be able to tell us whether some of these bruisings are old. Obviously, just looking at her, we could tell that a lot of them were fresh, but when we get the full ME report, the medical examiner will be able to say whether there's old injuries as well. And so that's going to really answer that question for us as well. Yeah.
One last one. We heard reports earlier this morning that there may have been another child abused just this week at 14 months old. Are you all aware of anything like that?
You can.
It's my understanding that as of yesterday, the homicide unit was assigned to an investigation regarding the death of another child. Other than that, I don't have any details. I believe the case was transferred over to the homicide unit yesterday. So I can say that that's also something that they're working on. Yes. Yeah, the homicide unit of the police department, sorry, not us yet. Nothing has come through to us, but it's my understanding that the case from SVU was transferred to homicide yesterday.
All right. Jack Tomczyk, Metro.
Question about the Kimani case with Mr. Sean Hernandez. Did he have any criminal history of any kind, or is this the first time he's?
He does have a criminal history. I'm not going to go through all of it. Obviously, there'll be a time and a place for that. But what I can say is much of it, it's like car thefts. A lot of thefts, a lot of theft by, a lot of receipt of stolen property, car thefts, being caught in stolen vehicles, things like that. The other thing I can say is that we did learn that he was on probation in Bucks County at the time of this, and that our office has made contact with Bucks County to make sure they're aware of it, and I believe detainers will be lodged in regards to him being on probation in Bucks County. Now, obviously, he's being held without bail here, but our office has made contact with Bucks County, and it's my understanding that they will be lodging detainers on their cases.
And regarding the other two people who were arrested, was there a relationship to the 2-year-old, or were they family?
They were not family, they were friends of the, obviously, adults.
On probation for those like car theft, or I mean, for like thefts and that type of stuff?
In Bucks County?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, receipt of stolen property, unauthorized use of a motor vehicle, theft, things like that. Yeah.
All right. All your questions? Thank you, sir. Mr. Dean, Mensa Dean, The Trace.
I have a question off the topic.
Sure.
DA Krasner, you often speak about the gun violence task force, work with the gun violence task force, which obviously there's collaboration with your office and others, law enforcement departments. However, three of the largest collaborative efforts this fall in the city of Philadelphia, your office was not involved either. In November, it was announced that more than 100 people were arrested for an operation claims being executed by state Attorney General Dave Sunday, DAs in Montgomery County, Delaware County, Bucks County, state police, and the city police department. In October, it was announced that 33 members of the Kansas drug gang were busted by the FBI, U.S. Attorney's Office, and the police department. And in September, it was announced that 21 members of a drug-related cocaine trafficking gang were arrested. 12 kilograms of cocaine were seized, 15 pounds of marijuana, and 19 illegal guns were also seized in that case. That was done by AG Sunday, and the DAs of Bucks County and Montgomery County, the city police department, and the city sheriff's department. So these three operations in September, October, and November took in a lot of drugs, a lot of suspects, and guns, and you were not, your office was not involved. So that begs several questions. Obviously, why was your office not involved in these operations? How was the public served by your office not being involved in these operations? And finally, do you believe that your decision in 2018 to withdraw your office from the state's back if you do not be involved in this operation?
All right, so I'm being reminded, Mr. Dean, that you asked us this question. We gave you a written statement in reference to it, so I would refer you to that. But I will just make a couple comments because I think that's fair to do. We do 35,000 cases a year. The vast majority of them do not involve the AG's office or the U.S. Attorney's office. That's as it has always been. State prosecutors in the United States handle 95 to 97% of all criminal cases that exist, and in general, they're handling them simply with local law enforcement. They're not working with AGs. They're not working with the U.S. Attorney's Office. And likewise, I had 25 years in federal court dealing with criminal matters before I became DA here. I'm very familiar with all their processes. They often do cases that are exclusively federal and don't involve the AG's office. This is normal. There's nothing unusual about this. I think the taxpayer is well served when we see that AG Dave Sunday, my Republican brother, is doing work, and when we see that the U.S. Attorney's Office, headed by a different Republican brother, is doing work. I think that that's very positive. All right, thank you very much. Oh, I'm sorry, you did ask me another thing, which is, do I think we did the right thing by withdrawing from the Pennsylvania District Attorneys Association? I absolutely do. That has no relation whatsoever to this. This is official activity as opposed to what they were up to. And simply put, what they were up to was decades of going the wrong direction in terms of criminal justice. The reason it was so problematic for the Philly DA's office is that they operated like the United States Senate if there was no U.S. House. What do I mean by that? I mean that a county jurisdiction that had literally one part-time prosecutor, we are an office of almost 700. I'm talking about a county. Let's just say hypothetically, we'll call it Coal Mine County, has one prosecutor. They had just as many votes as Philadelphia did in the course and direction of that activity. We had 40% of all the actual members of that group. We got one vote, just like Coal Mine County. So what they were doing, as we tried to go in a modern direction that has obviously been extremely successful, and they tried to go the opposite way, what they were doing is they would go to the legislature and say, we speak for all prosecutors. We are the voice of all prosecutors, as if we had supported what they were doing. It was absolutely essential for the legislature to be aware that some of the time, not all the time, about half the time, we had a different perspective, and we have achieved that. Thank you, Mr. Dean.
Small follow-up. You said we try to go in a moderate direction. Could you elaborate on that?
I think that the numbers speak to that. Thank you, sir.